everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, follow us at Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow us at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. When responding, be sure to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources that you see shared as links in the chat, will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Additionally, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week, we invite you to join us for GLR Week 2022. We'll be showing a slide shortly with some more information. And on Tuesday, July 26th at 3 p.m., we invite you to wrap up the month of July with a session co-sponsored by Overdeck Family Foundation on innovation in out-of-school digital STEM initiatives. Looping back again, we would love for you to join us for GLR Week 2022. Like I said, this is next week, July 18th through the 22nd. We'll be having a number of state and local events, as well as many plenary sessions that you can see on the screen here. We invite you to attend as many as you can and spread the word about the exciting events that are coming your way. Registration and more information will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. And now joining you is Elizabeth Sierra, consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Executive Director of Communications and Development at Foundations, Inc. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, Systems of Resilience, Critical Factors for Decision Making. As Sierra mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Siri. I'm the Executive Director of Communications and Development at Foundations, Inc. Foundations is a national education nonprofit. We're located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and our mission is to improve the quality of education by strengthening the skills of educators. We're thrilled to be the co-sponsor of today's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about the challenges that many cities face dealing with learning inequities and lagging reading proficiency, and how one city, Dallas, Texas, managed to minimize learning loss and make progress on grade level reading. We're going to explore systems of resilience, and that was built in partnership between the Dallas Independent School District and Boston Consulting Group, which focuses on critical factors and actionable insights that helped guide decision-making efforts across the district. Dallas ISD and BCG have been working together for 6 years and have seen amazing results. Memphis Shelby County Schools are in their first year of collaboration with BCG and will share insights from a school district that is still in the beginning stages of this process. I encourage you to read our full biography sheet for our moderator and panelists. We have a really impressive lineup for you today, and their combined experience and histories really show the caliber of expertise. So the link to the bio sheet will be on Clip, and it will also be shared in the chat box. Our moderator today is Cecilia Leong, Vice President of Programs at Attendance Work. Prior to joining Attendance Works in 2011, Cecilia worked for a variety of organizations that focused on district and school reform initiatives. We have an impressive lineup of panelists today. Kelsey Clark is Managing Director and Partner of BCG. Lauren Day is Principal at BCG. Nicole Santis is a Principal at BCG. Elena Hill is Assistant Superintendent of Early Learning at Dallas ISD. Angela Whitelaw is Deputy Superintendent, Schools and Academic Support for Memphis Shelby County Schools. And Belinda Walters Brazil is Deputy Superintendent at Marietta City Schools. So this is who's in the room with us. And now I invite you to let us know that you are in the room as well by introducing yourself in the chat box. We'll be using the chat box to drop in resources, and we encourage you to use the Q&A box for all of your questions. We will save some time at the end to answer those questions and have a more interactive discussion. And now I'd like to turn it over to Cecilia. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's such a pleasure to be here with these distinguished panelists today and with all of you on the Tuesday webinar. It's such an interesting idea, building a resilient system. Resiliency is something I typically think of as pertaining to human beings. And yet, what is a resilient system? I think part of what we're going to learn today in hearing the story from Dallas ISD is that a system that's resilient can withstand setbacks, withstand hard things such as the COVID pandemic, and minimize some of the effects and come back faster. So without further ado, I really am so excited to have Dr. Elena Hill from Dallas ISD start out. And Dr. Hill, good to see you again.
Nice seeing you. Thank you.
Would you start out and just tell us about how this journey began, about how Dallas ISD invested in early learning to improve third grade reading?
Certainly. Thank you so much. First, I'd just like to give a little bit of demographic information about the district. We are not unlike any other urban school system with over 200 schools that are geographically dispersed across the city. We do serve a large population of economically disadvantaged families. We do have mobility between schools as well as childcare deserts and food vulnerability and healthcare vulnerability in our city. And so we're not unlike any other school system in that regard. And so back in 2015, we had about 28% of our students that were on grade level in third grade. And so that is definitely something that began the change, the case for change, to have us think about, how we can really position ourselves in the pre-K through second grade realm to build systems and learners that would go into third grade a lot more ready. And so prior to the pandemic, Dallas ISD was growing 3 times as faster than the state of Texas. And so we were on a very good path, a good trajectory. We did suffer some losses, as many school systems did during the pandemic, but we were able to return to our pre-pandemic level this school year. And so I know in just a moment, Kelsey was going to be able to really give some intricacies about our partnership with BCG and how we really made this happen through a focus on an early learning strategy.
Thank you so much. That's such a teaser because everyone on this webinar wants to know how you built the system. So Kelsey, would you help us fill in some of the detail?
Yeah, I mean, I could spend the rest of the day talking about exactly what we did. So I'll try to keep it brief. I think first, building on Elena, it was definitely set on the community seeing this is where there's an opportunity, doing the landscape analysis, looking across where are there opportunities, and saying if we invest early, we can have the highest returns. And so really, it wasn't Dallas ISD didn't do this alone. They had a ton of partners and it wasn't achieved overnight. And so I think having that clear vision and just being that commitment, I think from everyone was really, really key in the starting point. there's a number of things that we did over the years. Okay, how do we increase access to pre-K? How do we implement class to measure quality? How do we roll out early learning coaches? And so like there were a ton of initiatives, but I think that what really stands out reflecting on the work that happened at Dallas ISD was how they were actually approaching the work, right? So if I think about like those key drivers for success and what actually makes it resilient is the rigorous use of data and analytics to make decisions, the very intentional continuous improvement practice and mindset and culture that we put in place, regular coordination. So how do we coordinate across departments and across stakeholders, right? Like understanding there's a much larger ecosystem when we think about early childhood and the whole child. So how do we actually break down some of those silos? And so I really think it's that culture and approach to the work that built that resilience into the system. And that also doesn't happen overnight. One of my favorite stories is, talking to people at the district now, and it's, they're like, oh, we ran this analysis and we saw there's some interesting trends. So we held a focus group and then we ran a pilot. And it's like, yes, that is actually how we should be thinking about these things versus just kind of like, oh, well, we don't really know what happened, but like, let's try something new. And so I think just building in those muscles, which again, took a lot of time, but that approach really helped them, I think, weather the storm of being able to think about, okay, let's be very, systematic about how we're approaching it. Is something I think that just is really different than what I've seen elsewhere.
Kelsey, let's go back one slide because I think we blew past that journey. Can you talk a bit more about where that curve started to turn? And
yeah, if you actually go 2 slides forward. Yeah, so this we tried to layer on some key things that we were doing. So as Dr. Hill mentioned, right, in 2015, it was really at 28%. And that's when we started, okay, what can we actually do? And using data, and that was a key part of our work, is like, how do we actually be driven by data of saying, if we actually get kids in pre-K, there's going to be a difference. They're going to be more kindergarten ready. They're going to be, like that's going to trickle down. And again, that was a long term. Like we started doing that even before 2015, knowing it was going to take a couple years to actually see that. But really, that was some of our, okay, how do we increase pre-K? We actually then launched coaching model then too. And again, like some of this, we start to see the uptick, even the next year or 2 years out. But I think a lot of that, it took time to implement that and scale it. So you really start seeing the impact many, many years later. Building out the data infrastructure. And so thinking about like, how do we, go from just having a bunch of dispersed data to really a data warehouse that all the data is in sync. We've got people dedicated, analyzing what's going on. How do we, use that in real time and get that into the hands of people who can actually use that data, which we will go into, Lauren and Nicole can go into later. And I think we're finding, and then it starts refining that. And so we saw some quick wins. I think there were some things that we did of like, how do we start to try to make progress as fast as we can? And then how do we put some things in place that we know may take a while, but we know are going to have, a huge impact once they play out. And I think that's what we saw here is, at the bottom of that curve, doing both of those of like, what can we do immediately, but what can we do that we know aren't going to see for a couple of years? And that's when we started really seeing big gains between like 17, 18, and then in 19.
That's such an incredible trajectory and upward trajectory. And then 2020, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about what happened 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, so 2020, I mean, obviously we've got, learning loss like everyone else. I think what was interesting though, is that what we saw is Dallas was able to minimize their learning loss. So looking versus other large urban districts in the state and overall, we didn't see as much of a learning loss as many others, and really contribute that to like what the system was in place, right? And so being able to react very quickly, being able, that kind of nimble, kind of agile response that they were having, like that story I mentioned of like, well, let's pilot something, let's do something. I think they like those muscles were already built so that when the system was shook, they were able to react very quickly. And so I think seeing that, of course, everyone experienced the learning loss, but really trying to minimize that and how do we actually get get our students back, what we, you know, at BCG call like on a V-shape recovery, right? So bouncing right back up to where we were before. And I think that we've, you know, this couple slides before this show that we were able to bounce back to that 2019 level this past year. And so I think that just is talks to about, like I said, the culture and the ways of working that were built into the system, not just the initiatives, but thinking about how you're approaching the work.
Yep. So I loved your phrase, we built the muscle before, and kudos to the entire Dallas ISD system for getting back to pre-pandemic. There are many school systems, I think, that are sitting here in utter envy of what you've accomplished so far. I want to invite Nicole to come in and talk a little bit more, and also Lauren, to share about the model that was built. So Nicole and Lauren, if you would tag team and share with us what Boston Consulting Group did to assist Dallas ISD.
Sure. And I'll share that I've had the privilege to work on this effort with a couple of different hats on. So both as a consultant with BCG and as the director of operations for pre-K through second grade at Dallas ISD. So responsible for owning the budget and data analytics for early learning across the district for a period of time. And being in both of these roles really allowed me to understand the overall vision for how data would be used to promote early learning outcomes, but also the infrastructure and systems and investment required to make the work a success on the ground. And over several years, Dallas has really set up the early learning team and early learning stakeholders to have access to the data they need to make strategic decisions about what is best for the youngest students, which means that early learning leaders like principals, instructional coaches, and the early learning department team themselves have access to all data on pre-K through third grade students. It's one thing to define what data is required and what would be ideal, and another to make access to it a reality. And that's really what Dallas was committed to doing. And they really owned the work and made a priority to get the right data in place. And what BCG did was help define the data needs and help to build a model that allowed Dallas to predict the chance of students reading on grade level in third grade based on earlier data and experiences along their journey. And so that allowed the district to be proactive about supporting students earlier in their journey versus reactive, and then putting that data into the hands of decision makers directly. So I'll hand it over to Lauren to share a little bit more about the predictive model and what we learned building it in partnership with the district.
Thank you, Nicole.
Absolutely. So I think as you can even see on this slide itself, you can start to see that while we were seeing really amazing progress, it was starting to kind of plateau and slow down a little bit over time. And, you know, after having worked with Dallas ISD for multiple years, this sort of prompted us to do a reflection. Since we had such great access to data throughout all of these initiatives, we had built out pre-K data, kindergarten data, classroom quality information. You know, we thought, what if we bring this all together and start to model out what we expect that growth to look like in the future? Now, of course, we couldn't have predicted COVID, but if you want to move to the next page, I think this is kind of what our initial projections, this was as of 2018, 2019, kind of what we were expecting. And I think a couple of things to point out on this page, as Nicole and Kelsey, you know, shared, the district really had a clear vision to guide the work in terms of very concrete numbers and targets. So the target for 2021 was 45%, and the 2025 target is 60%. I believe that those targets still hold. Maybe we didn't quite hit the 45 in 2021, but hopefully we still have the opportunity to hit that 60% mark. But one of the things to highlight on this page is that we were, based on the factors, and I'll get into this in a bit, the model that we kind of stitched together across 3 different cohorts of third graders that had gone and taken the exam historically. We looked at what were the factors throughout their entire student journey that had the largest impact on their outcomes. And we projected out what that might look like in future years and where we would end up. And what we saw is that we were expecting to fall short of the 60% goal. And so what was really exciting about this effort is not just the fact that we had all this data and we could put this picture together, but we were looking into how do we actually make this actionable and really targeted. So if we actually progress, actually 2 slides, I think. So one of the things that, yeah, the next one after this, yes. One of the things that we really wanted to look at were what were the most significant factors across those 17,000 students that we had monitored over 3 cohorts. And I want to share this slide because, you know, I don't think anyone should see this, and this is the formula for every single school district, but very specific to Dallas ISD, that there were 4 factors that really made the most significant difference. The first was pre-K attendance and access to high quality teachers. These were 2 particular metrics that had a really positive influence. And of course, not surprising, and I know, Cecilia, this is a topic near and dear to your heart, but chronic absence and middle of year moves were also very negatively correlated factors. And, you know, we don't necessarily need to talk about these factors right now, but if you move to the next page, what we learned from the model is we actually put together a set of actionable dashboards for the district. So what these dashboards show is that based on those major metrics and kind of drivers of impact, we actually can look at each individual student based on the data quality that they have in Dallas and see, you know, Jane, she has actually had, she didn't go to pre-K. She's had chronic absence for the last few years. She actually moved in the middle of the school year last year, and, you know, her teacher is getting lower quality ratings. And what that means is that principal is given a tool to say, I need to really support Jane more effectively, and I need to give her more resources, and I can really focus on building her as an individual. And I think that is one of the most, you know, exciting things, I think, to really action the data, to really be focused on meeting students where they are. So happy to talk more about the dashboards, but I think it would also be really meaningful to hear from Dr. Hill about how these are being used.
Yes, please, Dr. Hill, share with us who is using these dashboards and how is it driving the sort of support that's leading to better results?
Yes, and so we have armed the people that are closest to the work with access to these dashboards, which are the campuses. So campus principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches who are able to make decisions. And so as a former principal, I do remember the end of the year where we are sorting students for classes for the following school year. And we did it more based on anecdotal information we may have about the students, possibly some data that we have, some student outcome data that we had on the student. But this really upgrades that because it allows the principal to have knowledge of these risk factors that have been identified. And so, you know, did the child attend pre-K or not? Did the child have a lot of mobility from pre-K through 2nd grade? Did they change schools in the middle of the year? Did the child have access to high quality teachers, or was there something that just happened to all of us with the pandemic where we've had a shortage of teachers and you know, kids are being sometimes taught by less effective teachers. And so just being able to use that is helping them, to Lauren's point, really figure out how to support them properly and effectively in the coming year. I can give a couple of other examples of how we are actually using this data. So if we take just the pre-K attendance, just truly prioritizing pre-K enrollment in the district. So having a very clear marketing strategy to not only recruit, but retain kids from when they come to us for pre-K to go directly into kinder, and just to keep that continuum clean. For access to high quality teachers, Kelsey spoke about this before with our coaching model. And so we have early learning coaches that are able to work directly with teachers to build capacity. And so that's one way that we are helping have kids be able to have access to high quality teachers, as well as the negative factors, just reducing the instance of chronic absenteeism. And so that's a lot of family touch points. That's a lot of work with attendance teams on campus to, you know, provide interventions for them to work with their families so kids can be engaged in school and actually show up. And then the middle of the year moves, I think it's just that we can't necessarily stop that, But what we can do is help as much as we can to have a warm transition between schools. And so I'm just being just very intentional about that. The directors in early learning have owned this work. And so we are able to just impact it on a daily basis.
Those are such great examples. You know, underneath all these processes is a lot of work and investment, because mindsets don't change overnight. Can you share some stories or strategies of how you got people to embrace using data regularly and this idea of continuous improvement?
So I think that's just something from a leadership perspective that we just keep in the forefront. And so one of the things in Dallas ISD's early learning team is we make a case with data. That's one of our mottos that we use. And so just not acting blindly, just based on how we feel or our perceptions, but truly looking at the data to see what it is saying to us. And so we can make a change. And so you know, as I said before, the director team of early learning are equally committed to this work, to be able to use data to really make the changes that are necessary for our kids.
It's wonderful.
I'll just add on real quick. What's great too is that we've been able to move from being reactive to proactive. And so like we used to use the data to explain things like, well, what happened and why, which was very helpful. Don't get me wrong. Like that is instrumental, but like, now we're at a point of like, let's actually intervene before it happens, right? To exactly to Dr. Hill's, like getting it in the principal's hands, and they know it's really important that I get Susie in a high quality classroom so that she doesn't have 2 straight years of you know, some experience. And so I just think that move from being reactive to proactive is really game changing.
That's a great comment, Kelsey. Thank you so much. And it's true as much around attendance data as getting into a high quality pre-K program. It's fantastic. And hopefully it's going to keep going as you aim for that 60%, Dr. Hill. Okay. Well, it's in a way almost intimidating looking at this story because we have gone deeply into it. I actually would like to invite Dr. Whitelaw from Memphis Shelby County to come on and just share with us, Dr. Whitelaw, if you're able. There you are. Share with us, since your district is making this sort of investment, but you're much earlier in the process than Dallas is. Help us understand what you're investing in and why you decided to undertake this work.
That is a great question. So again, thank you for having me on today. But we just decided early on to take on this as a priority in our district, early literacy. And we did this not only as taking on as a priority, but we stamped it by making it a policy within the district as well. So we are committed to our 3rd grade commitment, and just a few details about our 3rd grade commitment. And inside of that 3rd grade commitment, we look at student achievement data, especially in ELA. We also look at the Lexile scores, as well as how our students are doing on the formative assessments. But then we take that information and we share that with our parents throughout the year. So parents are familiar with exactly how their student is doing in 2nd grade based on this 3rd grade commitment that we have in our district. And not only that, and how we're starting out in investing, there are a couple of things that we did early on with the ESSER funding. One, we have hired over 700 assistants for our K-2 teachers. So we believe by reducing that adult student ratio inside of a classroom will give teachers more time with small group instruction, more time with actually differentiating instruction and actually intervening. So that was an investment for us. Not only our specialized educational assistants, but we also have spent a lot of time and we've been very intentional with ESSER funding in ensuring that we have training for our reading laureates. So we have a laureate in every elementary school. So we have 96 reading laureates, and they spend half of their time also coaching and mentoring our teachers in K-2. So those are the 2 things that we believe that will turn the corner. But also BCG has been very instrumental in helping us with starting what we have here, our strategic partners in literacy. And we have a community partners, so definitely first aid as well as, first aid and literacy Mid-South. They're our partners in this work. And what they've been able to do is to really advocate for us across the county and helping our parents to understand where we are. So again, BCG is working with us, working with our partners, working with the local communities, agencies to really support this work.
Wonderful. And where are you in terms of figuring out the critical data points to look at?
So early on, again, I think that I would have to agree, just as Dallas, we are using a lot of dashboards, but we had to basically really go back and make sure that our teachers and our principals and our APs, assistant principals, understood the data. So we have created a couple of dashboards in our district to help with this initiative. So every ESSER initiative that we have, we also have a dashboard for it. So looking at data, some of the things that we early on that we're doing, we have a dashboard that looks at our specialized educational assistants. Not only do we have them, but are they working with small group instruction? How is that changing inside the classroom? And then also we're looking at data for our students with a third grade commitment. Again, how are we using this data to change instruction? So we're early on, but we actually have a couple of dashboards that's helping us to really figure out what's happening in K-2.
Wonderful, wonderful progress, and really looking forward to hearing your story as it evolves. May I ask you one more question before we turn to Kelsey and Nicole? So as a system leader, what are some of the things you anticipate that you'll need to do to equip your staff to use this wealth of data?
Well, we started this year, and so we have a tracking system. So we know exactly how many times that our principal is looking at this data, AP, our assistant principals, as well as teachers. So that's one way. But actually tracking, looking at how many minutes people spend looking at data, we didn't want it to be a compliance. So early on, we had that piece, but we started thinking about how do we use data week? So we have a data week every quarter. How do we use this data? And then principals are able to come and talk about it with their principal supervisors. So we had to change the tone of how we look at data, not as a compliance, but as a way of changing instruction and changing what's happening in classrooms. So we're spending a lot of time and a lot of well-intentional time with our principals, and they come, they report out, and then their colleagues hear them, as well as offer other strategies for them that might work in different cases and case scenarios. So again, moving it from compliance to moving it to that we are learning how to use this data to change instruction.
That's an incredible shift. So data isn't a hammer, it's a flashlight, and it's showing the way. That's fantastic. Kelsey, Nicole, based on the work that you've done in multiple districts, right? Both Dallas and now in Memphis, Shelby County and other places, what are some things that district leaders should really be thinking about and investing in as they're considering how to build resilient systems?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I think districts can start doing right now. The first I would say is just developing a vision with a really clear, measurable student outcome goals. And I would also emphasize on that, on top of that, equity and how are we actually closing the achievement gap. Then I would say if you don't already, then defining how you're going to measure quality in the classroom and instruction. We've seen some districts use class, others have had homegrown tools, but really needing to measure how every single classroom, and it's just such a helpful early indicator. I think that was really transformative to Dallas, and now we're even working with Memphis. I'm like, how are we actually measuring quality and actually being able to quantify that? And then start pulling together the data to make data informed decisions. I think, it took a long time for us to get to the robust model that we actually built in Dallas. But as you heard from Dr. Whitelaw, like you can still start pulling that data together and start getting it into the right hands. You know, a great example of where I've seen a number of start is just like a pre-K market analysis. Like, right, we've seen a number of districts are like, we've got a lot of pre-K seats, but then what we often find is when you dig into it, are they in the right place, right? Are they the right types of seats? And so I think there are some things that districts can do pretty quickly and easily, of like just starting to actually, how do we infuse that data in our decisions? And then the one challenge that I'll call out, and Nicole, welcome your thoughts too on both that and you know, what districts can do, but impact takes time. And I think often we see districts start to slow growth or even lose ground in 1 year. And it's really tempting to change the course. And I think staying that course is so critical. It takes board commitment, district commitment, community commitment, and you really need resilient leaders to build that resilient system and fortitude, like, and to persevere despite the obstacles. And so I think just really that staying the course is important too.
I was just going to say something similar, Kelsey, that what's necessary here is an honest commitment from senior leadership, your school board, and the community that this is a priority, because it's not often easy to make the necessary investments in expanding access for families, staffing up classrooms and instructional coaching programs effectively, and so on. So it's critical to do the upfront work to make sure that you have the buy-in that you need to really move the work forward. And that might, or most definitely will, require making the case for the value of these early years and of the programming that goes on, and articulating that with data so that those less close to the specifics and to the topic can easily believe in its importance. And I'll add too that from the perspective of building out the right data and the dashboards and the views that folks are going to need to make different decisions, it's really also listening to teachers and coaches and principals to make sure that the work that you're doing not only aligns with the overall vision for where you want students to be in the future, but also what teachers, coaches, principals tactically need today to be able to do their jobs most effectively.
So really paying attention to the users as well as sustaining the commitment over time. Yeah, thank you both. What a wealth of experience you bring. At this point, I would like to invite Dr. Walters-Brazil to come on and reflect on what you've been hearing. You're an experienced educator, experienced administrator. Love to hear your reflections on both the Dallas story and what you're hearing about the commitment it takes to do the work.
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me. Just so some of you know, Marietta City Schools is a city school district that's located about 20 minutes north of the Atlanta metro area. And I felt like there were so many things going on between my esteemed colleagues, between Dallas and Memphis and BCG, but things that just kept reoccurring is like this common focus and commitment that it takes an entire village to make this happen. So partnerships, bringing in an entire community, making sure that all stakeholders are involved and that leaders are supported, teachers are supported. Your central office needs to know what your vision is and the goals that you're obtaining to reach. And I think when your Board of Education understands and you can put that information into data with obtainable goals on where you're going, it makes it, a roadmap that everyone can follow and a venture that you can kind of see progress along the way. So just really impressive. Kelsey, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I was so captivated by the comment that you said, using data to be proactive. So many times in education, we are data rich, but we are data unorganized. And so what do we do with that data? How do we actually use it and put it into teachers' hands to make the instructional practices in the classroom change so that's a direct result for students? So Kelsey, I loved that comment. I'm going to coin it and steal it. So I just thought that was really beneficial. But great things going on in all of your districts. It was really nice to hear the results. And Dallas, I would love to get my hands on your dashboard. I love the dashboard that you are using. I think that's being able to show that to administrators and teachers really helps kind of set where you're going. In Memphis, it sounds like you guys are building those as you're going along. So just incredible work happening. Nice to see the focus all over the nation on early literacy, because we all know how important that is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walters Brazil. At this point, I'd like to invite all our speakers to come back on. Let's take down the PowerPoint so we can see everyone's faces. I'm going to kick off some general questions for all of you, but as I'm doing that, I invite the audience to put your questions into the Q&A box. I've seen plenty of comments flying by, haven't been able to read them because I'm actually listening and paying attention to our panelists. But Elizabeth's going to help us in a moment get some of your questions answered. So please do ask. This is your opportunity. So I'm going to start out. I think for many who are contemplating this investment into early learning and literacy and thinking, where do I start? We've heard over and over again, it's about vision and leadership and commitment. So I'd love to go back to Dr. Hill first and say, so how did you get those stakeholders on board? Yeah, wonderful list. So tell us some stories. How did this happen?
Well, I've always known that everyone loves pre-K and everyone loves the littles. But when you get to the nitty gritty and you ask, so how are we going to pay for it? Like, who's going to own what piece of the work? That's when things kind of start falling apart. And so fortunately in Dallas, we were able to, from a district perspective, prioritize it as a district from the superintendent's office. And so that what it looked like was turning from just a pre-K department to a true early learning department. So we were beyond just pre-K and really thinking about the continuum between pre-K through second grade. And so it starts there. And then from there, it's just all of us speaking the same language, talking about the research behind why it's important to invest in early learning, thinking about the economic impacts later on, just student outcome impacts later on, that it just makes it greater for our students. And always just backing it up with research. Like we can't argue with the research that what happens with the brain development and everything that we can contribute during these early formative years.
Say one more word about some of your external partners.
Exactly. So this particular office in Dallas ISD has definitely grown over the years. Again, we started out with a pre-K department, and that is important. And as the position grew, it really started to grow arms into the community. And so we had to definitely depend upon philanthropists in the area, a lot of nonprofits, just connect with other organizations that had early learning as a priority. And so some of those BCG definitely helped with as we do co-presentations over the years with different groups of stakeholders. This includes the business community, just really making the case that when you invest in early children, early learners as young as 3 years old, that is going to be your workforce for tomorrow. And so they definitely have an interest in building their workforce. So that is something that we always had to keep in mind as we were developing the strategy.
Thank you. Dr. Whitelaw, I saw you nodding your head vigorously as Dr. Hill spoke. What would you like to say about getting that support from key stakeholders?
Actually, as Dr. Hill was talking, I was writing down some things, and one statement, really, we started off with reimagining 901 in our district, and that is our strategic plan. But early on, we started talking about early literacy as well as literacy throughout the grades 3 through 12. And how we got our partners to join us. I will say this, that Memphis-Shelby County, we are very lucky and very blessed that we have so many people who want to come on board to support us. But what BCG helped us to do, that we're developing one plan for the community, one plan for the school district. And so basically our community partners bought into that idea. So instead of people coming to us, we're saying these are the things that we need from the community, and this is how you can help support early literacy. This is how you can help support our families, because we believe that if we have one plan, one strategy, then all of us can move students in our district. So I was nodding, agreeing that this has been great work, but it's been rewarding work to see all of our community partners to come on board with us, to see what we need, and then help us from inside out.
Cecilia, do you mind if I jump in for just a second?
Not at all. I was going to go to you next, so go right ahead.
Awesome. So I saw someone put in the chat our Literacy and Justice for All initiative, and I couldn't help but think when Dr. Hill was talking about how important it is just for that community involvement and starting in the preschool, which I think also showed up in Dallas as some of the 4 things that the pillars of what they saw for improvement. One of the things, although we didn't have a partnership with BCG, we did partner with, in the Atlanta area, with the Atlanta Speech School and the Rollins Center, which is a speech school inside of Atlanta. And we were actually funded by United Way. And we were able to put together an early literacy program that concentrates for students from birth through grade 3. But one thing that's been hugely instrumental for us is we've started partnering with our community-based preschools, because it's so important. A lot of those preschools and those teachers do not have strong staff development programs. So what we've tried to do is really reach out to our community preschools, work with them, have strong organizations and commitments with Head Start about ongoing staff development for teachers, and so that it's consistent of what we're doing actually in the school district. So that way we found that when we keep that viable curriculum and really focus on structured literacy and the science of reading, we're able to really kind of drive scores. And like Dallas, we're very fortunate that in 2019, those were some of our highest scores. And now this past year, we're almost back to 2019. So it's nice to finally go back in that direction when we saw, you know, the learning loss that everyone saw during COVID. And I would say probably most of our colleagues, we saw some of our biggest losses in K1 and 2 because they missed that direct instruction that they didn't get in small group when they were at home doing virtual learning. And it was so tough to kind of replicate that. So just common things with that pre-K instruction, community involvement, partnership.
And I just wanted to echo that we have also gotten back to pre-pandemic numbers. So to us, again, it's been an uphill this year, but we saw the work, we saw the partnerships working inside of our district to get us back to that place.
Congratulations to both of you. That's quite an achievement for the children. So I do want to go back to data because it's my favorite 4-letter D word that I'm allowed to say in public on webinars. I really want to ask BCG how data actually helps sustain that commitment to the work. And then I'd love our district friends to share as well. So Lauren or Nicole or Kelsey, any one of you.
Yeah, I think really this is just going back to some of the things that Kelsey and Nicole shared, where it's really not just about, and I think Dr. Walters Brazil, you also touched on this, it's not about just having this wealth of data, it's about really putting it into practice and building up these muscles. So I'm repeating things that folks have already said, but I do think that there's obviously a really, you know, so many districts have access to really great, interesting data. But one of the things that I think we talked a lot about with Dallas ISD when I was working closely with them is interesting is not the same as strategic. And I think that this point that Kelsey has made around, you know, looking at the vision and saying, okay, we want to get to 45% of students on 3rd grade, on reading level by 3rd grade. How do we consistently go back to those goals and make sure that the work that we're doing is tying back to that goal? And that's how you can really move from being interesting to something that's strategic and going to move the needle. I think we had so many conversations, and it's really tempting to look at all of this data and you say, oh, I wonder if this is happening, or this would be a cool thing to see. But we were often kind of pushing a little bit to say, is that going to actually change the way we approach things is that going to be the most important? And I think it was really meaningful for me personally, working with Dr. Hill and her staff to really see the lights come on in terms of like using this data. We worked with the coaching stuff, for example, and we showed them a lot of data around which particular efforts in terms of coaching. So one of the things that we learned, this is a very minor detail, but if you actually had a coach more consistently over multiple years with the same teacher, that actually had much better outcomes on classroom quality. And so really digging in to say, okay, we actually should make sure that these coaches are paired with teachers for over time. And so I think being able to really focus the data on things that are actionable.
And showing what works. That's really important, Lauren. Dr. Hill.
I would add just.
Oh, I'm sorry,
on
Kelsey.
that,
Go ahead.
I think it's really important. We asked about like, how do you get the community on board and the larger ecosystem? I think the data helps that too. And it helps when you kind of hit a bump in the road, right? I'm like, how do we stay the course? Like I can give an example where there was a year where kindergarten ready went down in Dallas ISD. But we could tell you exactly why to the point, right? Of like, we lost this many points because of this. We had a new curriculum that we all agreed to do because it was better. There was student mobility there. And like, I think it was like really clicked of like, yeah, we went down, but we know why. And so like, we can then have initiatives to directly, target those things. And so I think there's power too on just really understanding and not just like, oh, well, we went down, something didn't work, of like getting really specific and knowing what's working and what's not working.
Thank you, Kelsey. So really, there's several parts. One part is using the data to figure out what works and really drive the effective practice. I want to go back to this idea, though, of getting commitment and sustaining it. Dr. Hill, how are you using the results to maintain, sustain, increase the commitment to the work?
So BCG's work with us was not in vain. They've spent a substantial amount of time with us, and we have just really latched on. And so it begins with the internal team of seeing the success that comes from the model, but also principals and campuses really seeking out early learning now, because they know that we are armed with our arsenal of tools that will assist them. Many times in schools, the PLC focus is third grade and above. And so when, here comes early learning with a pre-K through second grade system that is going to be a benefit and just truly additive to a school's PLC system and how they look at data, how teachers can respond to data and act on data. And so that is one way that we are truly keeping our efforts at the forefront. Our specialists, our coaching model is something that is very impactful for us. Our specialists are able to walk teachers through data, help them make decisions upon data, help them with instructional decisions, co-teach with them, model, and all of that is simply based on our relationship with them and just our shared commitment that we want our youngest learners to do as best as possible. So I would say that is one of the biggest reasons, biggest ways of how we are just truly having people believe in us and truly buy in to the investment in pre-K through second grade and the dividends that it pays.
Thank you. So I am going to stop hogging the mic and ask Elizabeth, are there questions that the audience wants answered, or are there questions burning in your mind?
Sure. So we did have some questions about the predictive model. How did you identify and leverage the variables for the model? Other things that were asked were, how did you create buy-in for collecting and reporting the teacher quality data?
Okay,
So I guess
well,
start with the first.
would BCG like to take the predictive model one?
I can speak to the first question, and then maybe I'll pass it to someone else on the teacher quality question. But I think in terms of the variables, a couple of folks were asking in the chat about behavioral data and nutrition data, were those types of variables included. We wish that we had every single variable that you could track. We wish we had vaccinations and health screenings and nutrition data and really connecting those dots. We still, despite the wealth of data that Dr. Hill and her team have access to, it's still a really small picture of what students are facing, particularly outside of the home. You know, there's just a lot of factors that we are not looking at. So one of the really important processes that we went through is, number one, we had the benefit of having worked with the district for you know, several years. So we had an understanding of what our key hypotheses were. And then really worked very closely with the early learning department to refine those hypotheses. So one of the ones that really stuck out to me that I'll highlight here is the middle of year moves. I actually recall doing a school visit and we were looking at data, and it was an amazing school. They had really high quality classroom scores. Their results were much higher than the average, and you know, typically. And then when we looked at that year, it was the middle of the year, and their scores had declined in terms of their assessment. And you know, we sort of raised our hand. We said, you know, seems like things are really going great. Why are these declining? And they said that a new homeless shelter had just relocated into the area, and they had to onboard about 50 additional students into the elementary school, and their scores went collectively down, and those students had been in a different school. And so what we were thinking was, okay, how do we actually test that? What does that mean? And we actually, and I'll just go really deep for a second, we actually looked at every single student in terms of their student ID. We looked at where were they at the beginning of the school year, what school were they assigned to, and were they at the same school at the end of the year? If they were not, then we marked them as moving schools in the middle of the year. And that variable in and of itself was one of the major predicting factors, which I think Dr. Hill indicated they're now trying to take action on to have better handovers when students are experiencing that. We also compared it to end of year moves. That still had an impact. So if you move in the summer, in between school years, it's not as bad of an impact, but it still has a negative impact. It just wasn't one of the most significant factors. I'll add one more point and then I'll pass it to the teacher quality question, which is, this was not just about, there's a lot of data behind this where, you know, that was looking at an aggregate view. You can also use this model to see the prevalence of these factors across different student groups. And you could see the prevalence of middle of year moves was really significant among Black and Hispanic populations. And so, you know, that was one of the things that we also wanted to look at. What were the most important factors, but also how frequently is that occurring and how many students does it impact?
That's great. And I've seen different school systems actually look at other student groups like students in foster care and homeless students, and that same mobility issue having an impact. Dr. Hill, would you like to start on the teacher quality one? And if you want to add anything about this particular example that Lauren was sharing too, feel free.
Sure. So yes, I will. I'm looking at the question and it's talking about the buy-in for collecting and reporting the actual data on teacher effectiveness. And that is one thing that we are fortunate to have in Dallas, which is a evaluation system that stratifies teachers across a continuum of effectiveness. And so teachers have their evaluation score, which is private, but then they also have an effectiveness level. And so this particular piece of the dashboard is principal owned. And so no one else will see that. So a principal in his or her school will always have access to previous evaluation ratings and things like that of the teaching staff. And so the principal can have that information and can just know if that's a risk factor or not. And so it's super helpful when a child is coming to the school from another Dallas ISD school that the principal may not have knowledge of. Just, you know, has that child been instructed by an effective teacher? And more importantly, from my perspective, it really can tell a principal a lot about his or her own system. And so if a second grader has a flag for teacher effectiveness, that's certainly something that we can even help with the school to help build up the pre-K through second grade teaching staff at the school.
Dr. Walters-Brazil or Dr. Whitelaw, do you want to add anything to this question?
Other
when
than
we
I'm
think about-
super interested, sorry. So Dr. Hill, I'm just super interested in how you guys use that effectiveness score. So I saw Angela shaking her head. I was leaning in too. So yeah, I think that that's very beneficial. I'm kind of thinking about those teachers who we know get students into quadrant 4, who are effective teachers. And we know what happens when a student doesn't have an effective teacher and the learning loss that can take place. One thing I think that we didn't talk on about this, when we're looking at all this data also, like teachers will, not the effectiveness rating, but the actual student rating and being successful in programs that have the longevity to kind of carry on in sustainability. When teachers start seeing the data move and knowing that the practices they're doing are actually making a difference for students, that buy-in is just genuinely in place. And you'll see teachers go, oh my gosh, this really worked. So I think sometimes just making sure that we have enough coaching and pieces in place for teachers to be effective, because they don't come to school every day not to be effective. They need additional support on what we need to do to reach every student so that every student can be reading on grade level or ready to read by 3rd grade.
And I would agree as well with both Dr. Hill as well as with Belinda. But I do think that even in Memphis-Shelby County schools, while we're looking at their LOE, their level of effectiveness, we often think about getting students to the achievement line. But what we really focus on, how do we move our students that are 3 years behind? Are they moving students to ensure that we create this space where they're catching up? And so that's important with us, and how we buy in the same way, that when teachers really feel that they're moving students, that they are able to move them to achievement. If they're able to move them from below to approaching, if they're able to move them from approaching to on track, then that they can see their worth, their value, and then we see the buy-in from the district. And I feel like that we're getting that traction as we look at our pre-pandemic numbers and looking at our literacy scores at this point.
So unless Elizabeth, there's a lot of other questions. I have one question in my area of interest. I do want to ask about that factor of chronic absenteeism. How do you help your staff address that particular factor? Because I know from working in this field for over 10 years that sometimes teachers don't see it as their job to address absenteeism. And yet it's one of the 4 factors, if you change it, can really result in much better literacy and proficiency at 3rd grade. So I'm going to pick on you, Dr. Hill, because I warned you beforehand I would ask you this. And anyone else who would like to add in after.
Of course. I think one of the first points is that there's just a difference between attendance and then chronic absenteeism. And so as teachers, we're typically thinking about, is a student absent from school? And if so, can that student make up the work and receive the grade? That's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're really getting at when we think about chronic absenteeism. We're talking about any time away from school, a certain amount of time, which means that the child is not engaged in school. So the last 3 years, we have engaged in a family touch point system from the district perspective. We initially focused on just the early learning grades, but this past year we did scale it to district-wide, where parents can opt in or opt out, but they will receive text message nudges when a child has reached a certain threshold of being not in school, not engaged in school, meaning they're absent. Also letters that go home that are very family friendly. And so this has been a change for us because it's not the truancy letter. Truancy still happens outside of this.
But this is the chronic absenteeism where you miss 10% of the school year, 2 days a month over the course of the year.
Exactly. Yeah, and so the letter will say, hey, Cecilia, did you know that your child has missed 6 days and his or her peers have missed 2 days? And so that really will grab a parent's attention. And so the goal of that is just truly to reunite the parent with the school. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece is just finding out what the need is, like what are the barriers to why kids are not engaging in school. And I say a joke, it's not a joke because it's the truth, but 4-year-olds are not driving themselves to school. So we're normally speaking to the parent and really trying to figure out, is it a transportation issue? Is there a health issue in the home? What else is going on and how can we connect you with resources? So that's one way that we have helped with our chronic absenteeism in Dallas.
Fantastic.
The
Thank
other
you
thing
for
that's
sharing.
helped is so there's also an initiative where teachers are doing home visits. And I think that opens the door, right, to like more open transportation, like the communication between the families and the teachers. And to your point of like, it's not their job, but they now have a connection with the family. So they actually feel that they have permission, I think, a little bit more than they did in the past.
That's exactly right. You can learn a lot through a home visit. You can learn so much about a family, and a teacher can learn so much about just their own practice and how they interact with kids.
Fantastic. And BCG team, how are you equipping various folks in departments and groups in Dallas ISD to use that particular data point? Or is that Dr. Hill's job?
Well, we certainly were thoughtful about how to make sure that it was being reported on a regular basis, right? So since we're not in schools or on campuses every day, we're not able to make those direct changes alongside principals and teachers. But what we were focused on was ensuring that the dashboard that was built to share risk factors with principals and instructional leaders on the campuses was highlighting this as a topic. And then working with Dr. Hill and her team to help think about how to strategize in the hot spots where we're seeing this as more of an issue in some places than others, right? So being thoughtful about what are we going to do where we're seeing this risk factor pop more frequently than in other places.
Right. I love that because, you could have a highly effective teacher, and if the student isn't there, that's what's really going on, right? Versus, you need to work on coaching the teacher, et cetera. Dr. Whitelaw, do you want to say anything about this particular item?
Chronic absenteeism, as a matter of fact, Kelsey and Nicole, we were all talking about it this morning. It is an issue in our district, and definitely we have the SART team meetings and we're working with our families, but we still need help from our families. And it is a problem, or let me say it's an opportunity for us to get better and to really dig in deeper of how do we help, because I think Dr. Hill stated the problem well, that we can't blame a pre-K student or a first grade student or a second grade student for being absent. What we have to do, we have to work with those families and really tune into what they need and how we can provide their support from them in Memphis-Shelby County schools. So again, it's an opportunity for growth for us in our district, and listening to Dr. Hill, just thinking about how can I now take back home visits to our team and really think about how do we launch that here in Memphis-Shelby County schools.
Yes, to be continued. I love when people make connections. Okay, I'm going to turn to Elizabeth. I feel like I've used up all my free question cards. Any more questions from the audience before we wrap?
We did have a question about the measures that were used for teacher effectiveness.
So that's our evaluation system. So there's different things that go into it. Part of it is like a standard teacher performance rubric, things that you see actions and behaviors in the classroom. But the other part is student data driven. And so part of the teacher scorecard it reflects climate survey data of the campus, student outcome data of the students enrolled in his or her class. We have student survey data that we also use. And so those are the types of things that are included to determine a teacher's effectiveness.
And that's unique to Dallas ISD,
yes,
right?
That's with our system, yes.
And in Memphis-Shelby County schools, we have basically the achievement and the growth scores that are factored in, as well as the observation scores and professionalism. So we have a combination of criteria data points that we look at as well. to make up the LOE.
Mhm.
So I don't know if everyone is aware that Foundations Inc. is primarily a professional learning organization. That's our thing, right? Building and strengthening skills of educators. So I was interested to hear a little bit more about the coaching model and maybe talk a little bit about this idea of pairing coaches with teachers over a long period of time. I think that's, a fantastic way to change practice.
Sure. So if you think back to the graph that we showed earlier, where we saw the dip and then the data started going up, that really is correlated with when we started to truly expand our coaching efforts in the district. And so, Dallas ISD is a very, very large district. However, we have a commitment to expand our coaching on a yearly basis. And so first, we look at priority. And so what are the high needs campuses, ensuring that they have a coach that will work alongside teachers. We differentiate between pre-K and K2 coaches. And so we've written in policy that every pre-K teacher at a Title I school in Dallas will have a coach. And so that coach will have a caseload of 10 to 15 teachers that they will be able to work with. And then we have the teachers that work with K2. And so again, that's just a cycle of doing an observation, doing co-teaching, modeling, whatever is deemed necessary, then going back, looking at the data to see if it's improved, and then setting a goal with the teacher, just, to continuously work on just a problem of practice inside the classroom. It doesn't always rest on the observational things of a classroom, such as classroom organization. We do get into coaching around literacy, math, social studies and science in the classroom. We depend a lot on the class observation tool because we know that that is a strong predictor of later success. The higher quality of the classroom, the higher, the kids are going to do later on. And so that's the basis of the actual coaching model, but we are always growing it because right now we're in about a third of the district and we have 129 coaches. And so we will just continue to grow each year.
Love it.
And
go ahead.
And I was just going to ask Dr. Whitelaw if there's a similar system in Memphis.
Well, so we have two things that are happening inside of Memphis Shelby County Schools. One, we do have a reading laureate that is at every elementary school. But our reading laureate is not a full-time coach, or they don't have full-time release. So what BCG is helping us with currently, right now, we're in the process of hiring 20 coaches to work inside of our schools with some of our teachers and then putting them on a tiered system. So we will have 20 coaches that directly have an impact on a set of teachers. Then we will have reading laureates who will be working with a set of teachers. So we're not at that place where we have full-time reading coaches for every school. We just have a reading laureate. And in the fall, we will have 20 full-time literacy coaches dedicated to that particular work based on the teachers that need that support.
Okay, I saw a question pop in from the audience about parent-teacher home visits. How do you position home visits so as to justify trust and not to appear it's checking up on families?
I could start there. It's the teacher that's doing the home visit. So the teacher is just reaching out to his or her population of kids and just asking permission. We don't just bombard a family. You ask permission. Can I come over? Can I just visit with you for a little bit? I think many times it turns into dinner or sometimes it turns into, the child just being excited about their teacher coming over. It's about 30 minutes, but the teacher is trained on, how to interact with families, how to communicate with families, and then how to gather data during the visit so they can use it to really help them later on. So it's about building relationships and trust with families and just, taking advantage of all the yeses that we get.
Wonderful. So consent as well as relationship. Okay, I'm going to do one last round We've really benefited so much from hearing the stories of all 3 districts, and particularly Dallas, which has been doing this work in building a system that's resilient and effective. So just one word of advice, one sentence of advice to folks who are contemplating starting this kind of journey. What do they really need to have in place? So I know it's tough because I'm saying one sentence, but if you could, maybe we'll start with Dr. Belinda Walters-Brazil, just since you've had the benefit of soaking all this in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a clear vision that can be clearly communicated so all stakeholders know what the involvement is, and then stick to your plan. So, it can't be jump, 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 but be very consistent to the plan.
I like that compound sentence. Thank you.
Yeah, trying to stretch 1 into 2. How about that?
I know. Dr. Whitelaw?
One sentence, I think, for me, having a vision from the superintendent who believes in the work, and they are able to carry out that vision about literacy. So I think that's my one sentence, that a person has to have the vision so that they can convince everyone else to buy in their vision, even before they make the step to come on board as our partner.
And from that top leader, the superintendent. Thank you. Let's turn to the BCG crew, because I'm going to give Dr. Hill the last word. Lauren, would you like to start?
Sure. I think the vision was certainly the thing that came to mind initially. I will also say to encourage you to question what's working and how you can iterate. So you want to stay the course towards the vision, but be willing to change kind of how you're doing that, and be willing to really question internally what's working and how you can be creative and think big about what's possible.
Love that. Nicole?
Sure. I think for me, it's thinking about how you'll get your data organized and appropriately staff your data and research team to be able to drive the work forward. Oftentimes we would run into issues where you didn't have enough folks who were really committed to the data piece of this work, and it is very challenging to tie it all together. So you need to make sure that you have the right team in place for that.
And don't let BCG hire them, right?
Yes, exactly. Couldn't
resist that one. Kelsey?
In our defense, she started with BCG and then went to the district and then came back to the BCG. I would echo, I mean, I'm very driven by the data. And so I think just the commitment to being data driven and building that evidence to support the actions that you're doing, I think is just critical.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Dr. Hill?
So I have a few statements, but I'll make it just one long sentence. Definitely have the team in place that has the heart and the mind to do this work. And so that team can have a concerted effort so everyone can work in the same direction. We have to fight through the noise, because sometimes there's a lot of noise in the early learning space. And so just fight through the noise of what you know is right for kids. And then you can always change the plan or the approach, but never the goal.
Thank you all so much for the words of wisdom, the stories, the journey. I wish you all well. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth now to close us out.
Thank you again. This has been just a fantastic conversation. Thank you to all our presenters. Cecilia, thank you so much for moderating the conversation. Again, we really appreciate your time in mid-July. We know there are a lot of vacations and things, but we appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise with us. So thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone of the upcoming webinars. If you haven't registered already, please do so. And please look out for more information about GLR Week, which is happening. I think Sierra is going to add our slides up. Here's our upcoming Learning Tuesday webinars. So on July 26th, it is Innovation in Out-of-School Digital STEM Initiatives. It's co-sponsored by the Overdeck Foundation. and GLR week, July 18th through the 22nd. There is a poll that you should see popping up before we end today. Make sure you take some time to fill that out. We'd love to hear from you. Your responses really help us build webinars that better meet your needs. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you everyone who attended the webinar and for participating in the Q&A. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.